Good to have you with us. This is Brenda Harms with Converge Consulting, and we are delighted to see so many participants. We had just a huge turnout for this particular webinar, and I'm delighted to see that so many schools are interested in having some conversation around the issue of customer service as it relates to higher education. We have about, I think, 125 or 130 schools joined so far, and we still have a few trickling in. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of ease our way into the presentation. We have a jam-packed hour. I have a lot of information to share, as those of you know I always tend to when I present. So I'm going to start moving through the presentation, and as folks continue to join, they'll be able to circle back with the intro at a later time. A couple of reminders. Please keep in mind that we are recording this session, and a recording will be shared with you, or will be available for download, on the Converge website after the presentation. So please feel free to go out and grab that afterwards so that you can take the slides and have the opportunity to have the audio as well at a later time. I also want to mention to everyone that while we have a lot of schools who are joining us today, always happy to have other institutions, so feel free to share if this is a webinar that you think was beneficial, share with other schools, and they are welcome to go out and download as well. So I'm going to go ahead and begin the presentation now. Thank you all so very much for joining us. Oh, I'm having just a little trouble advancing my slides. There we go. Sorry about that, a little technical glitch. A couple of quick words about Converge. Converge is obviously a higher education marketing firm. We work with a lot of institutions across the country, but we seem to have an interesting niche right now with folks who serve adult and graduate markets. We work with a number of institutions on the traditional side of the house as well, but probably about 80% of our business tends to be in that adult and grad side of things. So really speaking to what's next in relationship to higher education and how much higher it has changed. And we know that the adult and grad side of the house tends to lead at most institutions in relationship to adapting new things and really taking on new initiatives. So that's a bit, I guess, about us. This customer service webinar really came out of an interesting engagement that I did with a number of focus groups with prospective students and current students. And it was fascinating to me as I talked with them about what we could do better in higher education, them being our students and prospective students, that what really came up over and over and over were really themes around this idea of customer service. And I know as we watched people register for this webinar, one of the things that we were fascinated by was how many schools have really keyed in on this topic. And when I think about why the issue of customer service is so critically important, it really comes down to one issue, and that is grow. A couple of weeks ago, I had the honor of doing 2 presentations at 2 different conferences in 2 days, which was a whirlwind and a lot of fun. And I asked in both rooms, so probably about, I don't know, 125 people between the 2 rooms, I asked if anyone's mandate was not to grow, and not a single hand went up in the room. I think every institution right now in the country is looking at their adult and grad programs specifically and really urging them to grow. And one of the reasons why I think customer service relates so closely to this, and as I'm sure most of you are able to recognize easily as well, is that growth will not just come through getting more leads or enrolling more students. Those are certainly pieces of the puzzle, but it's a broader puzzle. And growth will really happen when you're able to tighten up all areas of your institution. And so this webinar, I think, really focuses on an interesting area and areas of the institution that we often don't talk about in higher ed. We don't talk about customer service a lot, but probably need to moving forward. This is a slide that I've shown several times in the last couple of months at conferences, and is really one that this is what keeps me up at night. When you take a look at this pie chart, and this is data from 2008 from the U.S. Census Bureau, so we know that their new data will be coming out in the next, hopefully, couple of months, and we'll be able to update this. But we have over 37 million Americans who have started school and not completed a degree. 37 million. That is a huge number. And while I know that for most schools that I talk to, and it is a true statement, a lot of adult students and a lot of grad students step out of their higher education experience due to what I often call life happening, issues at home, job change, whatever, and it's really not about the school, it's about life happened. And I'm willing to accept that answer from 50, 60, even 70%. But when we talk about 37 million people who started school and not finished, there are other things going on that are not leading to people continuing their education. And so today I think our focus of our conversation is going to be around a very important element of that. It's the piece we have the ability to control, and that's the idea of customer service. When you think about a description of customer service, I went out to a couple of different sources to just pull some nice descriptions of customer service that I like, that I think are clean and simple and easy. First one, customer service is the provision of service to customers before, during, and after a purchase. And when I think about that, before, during, and after a purchase, keep that in mind as we think about higher ed. The assistance and advice provided by a company to those people who use our products or services. Customer service is knowledge delivered with care to make life easy for the customer. So if we think about these in relationship to higher education, let's change up the language a little bit so that it's something we can embrace a little more easily. Customer service is the provision of serving students before, during, and after a purchase. And think about at your institution for a minute, the work that you pour into the front end of recruiting students and what happens once they've said yes. What happens once they've been recruited? What about their entire experience? So before, during, and after, they commit to your institution, if you want to think of it in those terms. The second definition, the assistance and advice provided by an institution to the students who buy its product. How do we assist our students throughout their process with us? And then the last definition, and probably one of my favorites, customer service is knowledge or assistance delivered with care to make life easier for our students. The delivered with care piece of this is really an important element. And nobody laugh in your various rooms. I'm probably going to get a little on the touchy-feely side today as we talk about how we interact with our students, because I don't think we are as aware as we need to be at how we come across to them, as we're going to learn from that little research project that I did. But customer service is knowledge delivered with care to make life easier for our students. Now, part of what I fundamentally believe, and again, if you've ever heard me speak, you know I say this every single time, part of what I really believe is that we have to be about doing better in the future. Your institution would not still be serving this population if you did a terrible job. So let's assume right now that the baseline for everyone that's on this webinar is good. We're doing a reasonably good job here. What the notion, though, of doing better believes is it believes that we understand that we are not operating at the level that we could be at our institutions. So it's not just about doing well or having a good baseline, but how do we really move ourselves to great? And how do we really step beyond where we are to providing a superior level of experience to our students? So that's kind of a premise of the webinar as we move forward. Certainly none of the comments today are meant to make you feel like, oh, we're doing a terrible job. You're doing a good job or you wouldn't be here, but it's about how do we do a better job. And we need to do a better job because of those 37 million adults. And again, this number haunts me. I don't know of any other way to say it. This number haunts me. That many people who have stopped pursuing something that they were intent upon doing. Just that's heartbreaking, and so that's our motivation today for this conversation. So the research project that kind of was the, I guess, the start of this customer service focused webinar was a research project that I did, qualitative research with 8 focus groups, about 98 adult students. One had to leave mid-session, so that's why I always say about 98 adult students. 4 of the groups that I talked to were prospective students, and 4 of the student groups that I spoke with were actually current student groups. And really asking them, what can we do better to help serve you? What are the things that would make your life easier as a student at our institutions? So I asked them, for the prospects, before they ever decided to attend the institution, what could we have done better? And then from the point of yes, and then throughout their experience. So some of that information is going to be a bit of what I share with you today in relationship to that. I added the little caveat of be careful what you ask for. Qualitative focus groups can be extraordinarily impactful and powerful because you hear the words right out of the mouths of our students. And so I've included within the context of this webinar a few quotes that I think will really help drive home some of the broader points that these students made to me and hopefully will make to you. Anytime I talk about customer service, I frequently get the pushback from institutions that once they say yes and get registered for class, it's all about the academics piece of things. And if a student leaves the school, it's because they're not happy with the academics. One of the things that I wanted to share with all of you is that in that focus group process, in those nearly 100 students that I spoke to, very, very few comments were actual comments and suggestions about how we could do better related to academics. A few of them were, and I'm going to share those, but most of the commentary actually had to do with doing better in other areas. And I included bullet point 2 here that nobody said I'm a customer so I deserve an A, because occasionally when I have this conversation with faculty groups, somebody inevitably in the audience raises their hand and says, we can't treat students as customers because then they think they're deserving of an A. First off, nobody said that to me. During talking to 100 students, nobody came with that mindset. I'm not saying that never happens. I continue to teach. I teach a number of classes throughout the year, and I have, on occasion, had a student or two who has made reference to what am I paying for in relationship to grade. But we cannot play to the exceptions. We know that students don't really feel this way as a collective. Is there an outlier? Perhaps. But I don't think we can play to the outliers here. We have to play to the norm. So again, within this notion of being customers and students as customers, that's not perceived as, so give me a grade. I don't want to have to work. Okay, moving on. I just wanted to clear that up early. Moving on. Some of the biggest challenges for our students really revolved around a couple of areas. Our internal processes, and you're probably all laughing a little bit right now because you're thinking, oh my gosh, yes, we know that's a problem. This is a harder one to hear, but I think it's one we need to hear. Our own attitudes and approaches when we are working with adults and graduate students. And I'm going to talk to you a bit more about that. It's not a comfortable conversation, but I think it's an important one. A lot of students' biggest challenges revolved around the idea of communication between departments on campus. And again, hopefully a few knowing looks are being passed around the room where you're sitting listening to this webinar. This was an interesting issue. Ancillary departments, and I'm not sure that's exactly the right language to put around these, but all of the other departments that an adult student has to interact with or a grad student has to interact with outside of maybe the little window of your adult student program. A lot of them commented that within that department, within that program, or area, those people did a great job, but the minute they had to go over to financial aid, the minute they had to go over to the registrar's office, the bursar's office, that's when things became challenging for them. And then our relationship with one another across campus was another area that the adult students really brought up as being an interesting challenge for them. So let's dive in here. And as I acknowledged earlier, be careful what you ask for. Some of this information won't be easy to hear. But again, if you've committed enough to spending an hour listening to a webinar on this topic, I know you've also committed enough to wanting to do something about the things that are interfering with our students. So let's dive in. A couple of key points that adults brought up, and it was funny, as I began to do these focus groups, one of the things I said was, this is your chance to have a voice with institutions throughout the country. And so I really asked them to highlight for me some of what they were interested in making sure we communicated, making their past matter. We're going to talk a bit today during our time together about credit transfer and prior learning and military experience and the credits we award for that. I was surprised. I knew this would be an issue. This was the main issue that came up for students when they thought of customer service. Institutional policies obviously play a role here, faculty roles with the students, and then student expectations overall. So those are going to be some of the keys that we touch on during our time. First and foremost, all customer service actually relates back to the relationship that you have with your students. And when I say you, I don't just mean the recruiter or the academic advisor, but truly everyone throughout the campus. Whether you only interact with an adult student once in their entire time with the institution, or if you interact with them once a month, you have the opportunity to build a relationship with that student. And when you do that, everything shifts and everything changes. So both the good and the bad in customer service often revolves around that interaction between the customer and the employee. As many of you know, I spend a lot of time on planes, so think of that experience for a minute. When you purchase an airline ticket that's committing to get you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, a place I fly from frequently, to Indianapolis, Indiana. When I purchase that ticket, getting there is a part of the customer service, right? I want to arrive. But it's not the whole thing. We make judgments about that flight based on the people we interacted with at the ticket counter, based on the flight attendants on the plane, how helpful was the pilot on the plane, was my luggage handed off to me quickly in the baggage claim area. We make judgments about the experience, the purchasing of the flight, and we talk about good flights or bad flights, often not based on did they get me there, but what were all of the pieces like. Higher education is the exact same thing. It is not only an issue of were my classes delivered and did I walk across the stage, but what was my experience throughout? And that's where we all play a role here. So the value of good relationships. First and foremost, we treat people better that we know than those that we don't. So again, that opportunity to get to know our student population a little bit. People we enjoy or have good relationships with often very naturally and organically get the best of what we have to offer. And think about this with your students, folks, and you all know, I worked in higher ed. I'm as guilty of this as the next person. When a student walked in that I just absolutely had a great relationship and just thought she was a delight or he was a delight, they got 110% of me. When a student walked through the door that occasionally I thought, oh, you grate on my last nerve, you always have a problem, you always have a complaint, nothing's ever good enough for you, I can admit and acknowledge that that student probably got slightly less of me as a professional because of my frustration. So focusing on building that good relationship is huge. As professionals, we are going to work harder for the people that we know. And for people that we don't know, people that we dismiss and think will be in and out of our lives very quickly, we don't work as hard for. Good relationships also allow us to navigate what can sometimes be a fairly difficult path of higher education with our students. That it's not them out there on their own trying to figure this all out, but really a process of us consistently walking the path with them. We also know that when you have a relationship with a student, it allows them to give us some grace. I couldn't come up with a better way to say this, so that's the phrase, the giving of grace. That's what I came up with. One of the hardest things I was presenting to a school on this exact topic, and someone raised their hand and said, listen, I work in the office that collects money. There is no part of interactions that I have with students that are even remotely pleasant. Because of that, the notion of customer service really can apply to me. I want to encourage you all to think about it slightly differently. We all have to communicate sometimes difficult news to our students. You failed a class, you don't have a refund check, you owe us money, you're blocked from registration. None of these are easy things to communicate. But I will promise you that if you have a relationship with a student, if they know you, if they approach the window or wherever you are, approach your office and see it's you and say, oh, I know Brenda's going to work hard for me. Oh, Brenda, how are you? How is your day? And we have that level of relationship. When I have to communicate to that student, I'm sorry, we can't register for you for class. You owe us $1,000. That is going to be received much more positively from the student's perspective than it would be if we have no relationship but I'm only the bearer of bad news. So that's what I mean when I say it allows our students to give us a little grace. It allows them to say, yep, I know she's just doing her job. I know she's having to communicate a hard message right now, but I know that she doesn't have a negative attitude towards me as a piece of it. Taking time to get to know your students means that you're going to be more invested in them and in their success. I think as we talk about and think about relationships with our students, again, it goes back to that whole idea that we work harder for students who we know, and that notion of becoming invested in them is critical. Good relationship also increases the likelihood that when something does go wrong, our students are going to let us know and talk with us about it before they just walk out the door. Retention is a huge issue right now, and a lot of times we know why our students don't stick around. But for every 10 that we know why they do, there's at least 2 that we know we don't have a clue why they left. They're just gone. they're going to come and communicate with us if they have a relationship with us. So how do you do that? How do you build that? This applies across, and everyone's probably chuckling as they are reading through this line. We build relationships by knowing things about people, all sorts of things that are not necessarily related to what's going on with their academic experience. So things like, do they have kids? Do they have a pet? What are their hobbies? What are the challenges they're dealing with right now? What are their victories and what are their biggest weaknesses? Knowing those things about people, just a snippet. I'm certainly not asking everyone on every campus to know all of this about every student, but just a snippet of this can make a huge difference in building that relationship. Showing interest in people is the key way to build a relationship with them, and it is important and critical regardless of what your position is on campus. This can't be something that we only say, oh, the recruitment staff will do this, or oh, the advisors will do that. Everyone on campus has to feel an obligation towards building a relationship with our students, no matter how small. So what gets in the way of good customer service? I'm eyeballing the clock here to make sure we're moving along okay with the slides. What gets in the way of good customer service? In higher ed, believe it or not, we have a lot of hurdles. I know, shocking information, right? We have a lot of hurdles that we ask people to jump. And some of those hurdles really can cause some barriers. But there are other things as well. So let's talk through these. Internal process absolutely is a threat to good customer service. One of the things, I spoke with an institution a number of months ago who said, we are a school that loves our process. And what we really unpacked during the course of the time that we spent together was that they were a school that heavily fell back on their process as their reason for doing things that they didn't think were very reasonable. It was kind of the, I hate to say it's an excuse, but process sometimes becomes our excuse. Oh, it just has to be that way. Places where our students and prospective students as well as current students talk to me during those focus groups that this really gets in the way is the acceptance of credits and transfer credits. And I'm going to talk further about this here in a minute, so I'm not going to go on and on about it right now, but that's a huge place where our internal process is a real barrier and it's a real headache for our students. And it's a place where our customer service does not shine through very well. Anytime the phrase, this is our process, this is the way we do things, this is our procedure, comes out of your mouth, that is a threat to good customer service. Because again, if you're leaning back on that, that is a crutch. And basically what I think you're communicating to your students is, I don't really want to take the time to explain this to you, or I don't even really know why we do this way, but it's the way somebody's told me we have to. We have to be very cautious with that. Processes that were not developed with adult students or grad students in mind. And I know that this is a huge one on many institutions, for many institutions that I've worked with, that processes are inevitably designed for the traditional age student, and then we have to figure out how to retrofit it for the adult student. That's a threat to good customer service. And then unkept promises, and this was one that came up actually fairly often with the adult student population that I did these focus groups with and grad student population that I did these focus groups with, when we committed to doing something and then we couldn't follow through. And it wasn't some things like, and I know what people are going to think, oh, well, that's why we can't do credit evaluation early. That's why we can't do, no. Things like, I'll get right back to you, and then waiting a week. Those were the sorts of unkept promises that a lot of the adult students talked to me about in relationship to barriers to good customer service. Another barrier or threat, I guess, to good customer service is our internal attitude. And again, this is where some of what we've learned, some of what we've talked about, it's a little hard to hear. But I think, again, the notion of doing better, we have to be open to hearing this. We work with grown-ups. We don't work with kindergartners. And you guys know, especially if you have kids, you've seen this. You've seen the kindergarten teacher who you think, God, no one has that good of a day every single day, right? Because she can fool those kindergartners into thinking she's as delighted with things like learning to tie their shoes as what they are. We can't do that to grown-ups. We can't fool them into believing that we are as excited to see them the 17th time in the same day. They pick up on that stuff. And so that notion of having a little bit of an attitude with an adult student or with a grad student is something that they not only pick up upon, but really complained vehemently about to me. and it translated in some really ugly ways. I just want to communicate that honestly with you. I distinctly will remember one gal who said, I know they think I'm stupid in the financial aid office, and that broke my heart. Because I know the financial aid office doesn't really think that, what she's picking up on is their attitude of, oh my gosh, you're back here again. So attitude. They see you and hear you talking down to them. And I can't be more explicit than to just say it that way. A lack of sensitivity in relationship to their individual situation. And this is a hard one because I know every one of our students has an individual situation. But again, I think our ability to communicate a little sensitivity around it, which we're much more likely to do if we have a good relationship with them, is really, really a critical piece here. The approach of, I'm just doing my job. You know, I'm just the one who has to tell you, you still owe us money. That sort of approach really did not feel good from the receiving end. And then an unwillingness to connect with their circumstances. And that, again, gets back to that notion of individual situation. Part of this also leans back heavily on this notion of internal policies, just the way we do things. And I'm going to speak to that here in a minute. Poor internal communication, and boy, aren't we all equally guilty of this. When we force our students to be the go-between between our internal departments, we have created a nightmare for them. And it doesn't serve them well, and it also, quite honestly, doesn't serve us well internally. When an office or a department on campus isn't current on, you know, a change in policy, a change in procedure, the way things are being done now, exceptions that are being made, it's often our students who are having to communicate that, and they don't like that. That reflects very poorly on us as an institution. Inconsistencies with information that's being shared with students. You know, all of these students go to class together, and they certainly all sit and talk. And so when John says to Betty, you know, oh, isn't it great that we've gotten an extra week, I'm just using this as an example, an extension on getting in our financial aid forms, and Betty's saying, I haven't heard about that. Those sorts of inconsistencies really create a negative feeling about the institution. Any communication that has to be initiated by the student. If the student has to ask the question in order to get the information, that's problematic. And again, I know they're grown-ups, I know they're adults, and I know they should be willing to ask. But how often haven't you found yourselves in the position of you didn't know what you didn't know to ask the right question ahead of time? So again, student-initiated communication can really be a threat to good customer service. And then not getting back to students because we don't have the answer yet. And I included the because you don't have the answer yet, because I know your jobs and I know how busy it is. And when one student comes to your office and has a very specific question on a very specific issue that is one fraction, you know, it's 10 seconds out of your broader day and an even smaller slice out of your bigger week. I think a lot of times we say to students, okay, I'm going to find out about that and get back to you. And then it gets slid off to a back burner. Or we've still got it on our to-do list. We have our eye on it, but we haven't gotten an answer yet, so we don't communicate with them. That reflects poorly on us, and these are small things, but these are ways that you can step in and try to keep the customer service at a good level. This notion of ancillary departments, or areas outside of the adult-focused department, is an interesting one, and one that we talked a lot about within the context of the focus groups. There are departments on campus that obviously, due to the nature of the work that they do, and I think of the department that collects money, whether you call that a bursar's office or the, you know, the bill collectors, I don't know what you call it on your campus, but that department, it's really fairly transactional. When a department has a heavier focus on process rather than people, you start to walk a fine line of not feeling like you're giving good customer service. So just be sensitive to that when you evaluate your own department. Say, wow, is most of our department about process? If it is, we probably really need to step up our focus on the people end of things. Departments that really communicate a message of our convenience, not your convenience. And that can be done in a million ways. Hours of operation, requirements that students have to show up in person, being out to lunch. You know, the person you need to talk to is out to lunch. Can you come back? You have to talk to a specific individual on campus. Nobody else can help you. Those sorts of things really benefit us at the institution, but are not as beneficial to our students. Lack of responsiveness is also a real issue. And again, we know that this is a challenge. one of the things that I specifically asked all of the focus groups is, what's a good return time? When you do place a phone call, when you do send an email, what is your expectation of return time? And it's really same day, folks. In higher ed, I was actually just chuckling this morning with someone. I actually just had an email returned to me that I sent September 9th. It's November. And the opening line was, sorry, it's taken me a while to get back to you. And this is from an institution. You might think this doesn't happen at your school, but I will almost guarantee you that it does, where things sit for days, if not weeks, before we get back to them. For our students, that's an eternity. When the crisis is yours, that is way too long. So that notion of getting back the same day is really, really critical, whether that's via phone or email. And it doesn't have to be with the answer. Sometimes it's just acknowledging, got your question, please know I'm working on it, I'll get back with you again tomorrow, can be really helpful. And then lack of awareness on a campus by other departments that there's even a program that takes care of adult students. One student specifically shared with me, I love that when I go to every single place on campus, their first question is, so you're one of our day students? Or they try to communicate the rules, expectations, guidance that they think they need to be offering based on them being a traditional student. So a lack of awareness. Other things, our relationship with one another. And I'm going to move a little quickly here through this because there's some good slides here that I want to be able to get to, and I'm just keeping an eye on the time. But how we interact with one another as departments on campus is something that's really felt by our adult students. Little knowledge of what one another does. Blame game. Oh, I can't help you with that. You're going to have to talk to financial aid. And I know that they're not very helpful. Those sorts of comments, for example, really difficult and something that our adult students doesn't reflect well on us as an institution. And let's be honest, they're right. So what were their suggestions? What would they say we could or should do better right away or as soon as we could? I shared with you a couple of quotes here to be trying to take us into this section of the webinar because I think quotes are very telling. First and foremost, my favorite quote. I might not have a degree, but I know more than most 18-year-old students. This came right out of the mouth of an adult student who was basically trying to communicate, I know I'm not a rocket scientist here, but can you please not treat me like I'm an idiot either, if I can be so blunt with my language. This was really laced with a lot of passion. Acknowledging that these are people often on our level, equals to us, peers, if you will, is really important. The benefit of having a great person on your team. I had more comments at one specific institution about the dean and the work that he was willing to do for students, and we're going to get into that a little bit more, but this quote I thought was phenomenal. The dean is amazing. When you really have a problem, you go to him. That notion of there's somebody out there who's willing to fight for me. Again, for their student comments, my favorite faculty are the ones who really want to know my long-term goals. They're here to do so much more than just teach. Love that. And then, again, hard to hear, but is it too much to ask that you just do your job? Are students really feeling like we push a lot off on them? Let's dig into these a little further. Remember I said that there was a lot of angst around this issue of transfer credits. It was interesting to me, and again, I expected this to some degree, but even I was taken aback by the number of students who felt, and for lack of a better phrase, ripped off by the institution that they were attending, and these are current students, about their credits and credits that wouldn't transfer. Really, really difficult for adult students, so something that I think we have to pay attention to and focus on. A huge element of making the final choice for an adult student has to do with the institution wanting them and feeling like what they bring to the table is relevant. So being able to willingly acknowledge those transfer credits, willingly acknowledge that military experience, that prior learning stuff is really, really important to them because it makes them feel good. It makes them feel like all the work that they have done in their life has not been for waste. When you evaluate is a really critical element. Students struggle with understanding, and again, having worked in higher ed, I get why this happens, but students don't understand why it is you will not evaluate their transcripts, why you will not commit to them a certain credit hour number until they've committed to you that they're coming there. Think about that final, you know, registrar's evaluation of transcripts and that final official number. They really struggle with, why can't I get that while I'm making my decision? And if you think about it, they're justified in asking for that. How many credits are transferred directly impacts how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. Two of the key critical issues that we know a student considering an institution has to have, you know, wrapped up and fully understand in order to make their decision. So when you evaluate transcripts or when you take a look at credits is really an important piece of this. What you turn away is viewed as, or is taken as an insult to them. And please know that. Please recognize that when you tell them these credits don't count, that institution isn't accredited, so we can't take that, what they hear is a judgment against them. What you've done doesn't count. Heartbreaking. So again, what we turn away is communicated in it feels like an insult to them. Evaluating transcripts, discussing the outcome of that transcript, and looking at options for earning additional credits, whether that's through PLA, CLEP, competency exams, whatever you do, is a huge service that we can provide to our students. Think about this, folks. If you are communicating to a student that they have a lot of credits from an unaccredited institution that you cannot accept credits for, you soften that blow dramatically by being able to move the conversation to, but let's take a look at what we can do. Let's take a look at CLEP exams. Let's take a look at competency exams or PLA and help them to understand that we're not saying what you learned there wasn't valuable. We're not saying you wasted your time, your money, your energy, but what we're saying is we need you to demonstrate that in a slightly different way. It shifts the conversation. This was a great quote, and I've included it in a couple presentations I've done recently because I just love it. This is, think of a student in the most frustrated tone of voice. This is a prospective student communicating this. If I don't have the this piece of the puzzle, referring to transfer credit, I can't determine costs, when I'm going to be done, or anything about what I'm going to need to do. You are a university. Isn't this what you're supposed to help me to figure out? Why do I need to have my application filled out before you're going to evaluate my transcripts? My credits aren't on my application, they're on my transcripts, and you've had my transcripts for 3 weeks. The frustration that this poor girl, truly, she was pulling her hair out because what she really needed to know from the school was, how many credits are you going to take? This is a game changer for me. This is where my yes or no sits. And the institution was saying, well, until you do X, Y, and Z, we can't really tell you that. Very frustrating. Poor service. Prior learning assessment can be a huge service to your students, if you really do it. And I mean that seriously, folks. Time to honestly evaluate your own policies internally. If nobody's gotten through it in the last couple of years, or fewer than 6, you're not really helping yourself. You're not really offering prior learning. It's a policy you have on the books that no one can take advantage of. The time it takes to assess credit for prior learning is really, really important. We often have students in this game of hurry up and then wait. Okay, get in all your PLA stuff. Now it's going to take 2 months to evaluate it and get back to you. And then, last piece, how we communicate the results of PLA, for example, or credit assessment, should be a celebration, not an email or a phone message. And this quote drove this home for me. Young woman said to me, I almost cried when my advisor sat down with me and said, you've just moved 4 months closer to graduation. It was a ton of work, but it was worth it. And she was speaking specifically in relationship to PLA. What I love about this, and I wish I could seek this advisor out and shake their hand, this advisor took the time to have this person in and have a sit-down meeting and then presented this information in a way where it was a celebration. You just moved 4 months closer to graduation because of the credits she had just been awarded. That is a beautiful way to say we just, okay, boom, 15 credits or whatever the number was. This stuck with this young woman in a tremendous way. This is what I mean when I say celebrate, the opportunities to celebrate. It's good service. Military credit. Lots of institutions right now are trying to get on the we want to serve military well bandwagon, and I applaud them, and I hope all institutions do. But if you're going to serve a military population, you have to be willing to evaluate military credit or military experience in a way that really offers a good acknowledgement from a credit transfer perspective of their work. whoever is doing this has to be trained and trained well. I just made a reference to ACE here because I know they offer a lot in relationship to trying to train people for military experience. But look at the power of this. Look at the power of this with this student's comment. I'm at this school because they really looked at everything I'd done in the military and acknowledged that I had learned a lot in a different sort of classroom. He was put on even playing field with his military credit. He felt as though this institution really acknowledged him and acknowledged the hard work that he had put in the military and were willing to transfer it into their classroom with these credits. Huge. The final authority for adult students. I was amused by how at every student focus group that I went to, especially those for students who were current students, how they all knew the name of the person on campus. And it was always a single person on campus who could really advocate for them and help get things done. I love this, but I'm also going to tie into this. It's a little sad for me that students have to have that best advocate on campus and really felt that it was only one person. This tied directly back to this notion of policy. Students often talked about the fact that they had a policy that was really getting in their way, and they finally had to up the ante and kind of call in this final authority to get people to understand that the policy didn't apply or that the policy didn't make sense in their circumstances. So one more quick thing. I worked with a great college president who once said to me, and I will remember this forever, policies should be developed to handle the majority of cases, typical circumstances, not to overrule common sense. And sometimes, unfortunately, folks, we do lean on our policies so that we don't have to make a judgment call on things. And sometimes you do just have to make a judgment call on things. One of the things, again, pushback that I sometimes get is, well, if we make exceptions, adult students are going to take advantage of that. They're going to go find that person and seek them out over every single little thing, and that's why this is problematic. They really don't. They don't in the majority of cases. And again, we can't play to the exceptions here by having a person on campus who's a good advocate. This was an interaction that took place within a student focus group between two current students. And there was a guy who said, you know, I haven't really had to do this yet, but I hear that if you get into a major problem on campus, the campus dean here is really good and helpful. And he hardly got that phrase out of his mouth, and this girl jumped in. And she was phenomenal. And she's like, oh my gosh, he is. He's phenomenal. I personally, and again, I'm this girl, I personally had a situation that I struggled with for 2 weeks, and finally I just knew I wasn't going to get it worked out, and it was going to postpone my graduation by a semester, so I had to ask for help. I set up an appointment with him, again, referring to this campus dean, explained my situation, and this is what I love about this. And before I got back to work, he called my cell phone. The problem was solved, and he apologized to me for the hassle. Folks, the customer service in this is in the immediacy and in the apology that this happened in the first place. That's service, and that is not hard to do. Now, I fully understand that sometimes deans have a little bit more authority and can make decisions and make things happen a little bit more quickly, but this person has a reputation on this campus that if things really get sticky, and again, I want to tell you, people don't take advantage of this, and the guy who led into this with this I haven't had to, but I hear sort of comment, was kind of saying, you know, you don't run to this guy for everything. You don't go to the dean for everything, but boy, if you really are in a jam, he's a real advocate for us. The in case of emergency person, I think, is critical for adult students, and letting them know who that is really, really smart. Now, I'm also going to say this. I happen to know this dean pretty well, and he is a tremendous human being. I will tell you that probably as often as he gets to give good news, problem solved, sorry for the hassle, probably at least as often, if not more often, he also has to say to students, I'm sorry, what you're asking can't be done. Because of who he is, the relationship he has with his students, and the reputation he has as someone who's willing to try to go to bat for our students, students are understanding of that from him. We don't take no very well from people we don't like and respect, but we can accept no from people that we like and respect if we feel like they really have our best interests at heart, and that's where we get back to that notion of relationship. Okay, training faculty. I got to keep moving here. Sorry, I have a lot to say. Training faculty. I just said, and this was just a couple weeks ago, and I want to thank the woman who pushed back on me when I said this. I said, I know we don't really have a lot of ability to set expectations for faculty. And her hand shot up in the audience, and she said, you know what? Yes, we do. We are all in this together. We all work in this together. At her particular institution, she works with a lot of adjunct faculty, but she said even our full-time faculty, we have a right to engage in these conversations with them, and she's right, and I'm glad that she gave me the pushback because I needed it too. Teaching adult students is about a whole lot more than teaching just content. We know that. Those of us who work with our adult students and grad students know that. It's also about building that relationship, and it's understanding what our students want out of their experience. What's our students' end game? What's the job they want? What's the promotion they're looking for? What's the dream company they want to work for? A faculty member understanding that about the students sitting in their classroom is a critical element to them providing good service. Faculty members are often that student's connection to the field that they are striving to get into. These are, whether they want to be or not, mentors, probably to some degree held up on a little bit of a pillar. These are the people that our students look at and say, I want to be them someday. And so when we think of that person who you want to be like someday, taking the time to say, what's your long-term goals? Not where do you see yourself tomorrow night, as far as what class are you sitting in, but where do you see yourself in 5 years, in 10 years is huge. We have a right as institutions of higher education to talk to and engage in those conversations with our faculty and setting that as an expectation for our faculty members. Most of our adult student classes and graduate level classes are small enough that there's no reason why faculty can't be engaged like that. And this quote from a student, boy, talk about it coming around. The best faculty I have ever had are those that take the time to find out what I do, what I know, and where I want to go with my career. It feels like they care and that they are willing to make suggestions about how I might get there. And what I liked about this quote coming from the student is I will tell you this is a pretty big institution where their adult student classes are 25, 30, 35 students easily. And the faculty member she commented on, his name actually came up several times in my groups, was a person who, even in these slightly larger classes, took the time to understand the goals of his students. So huge. Our students' expectations. Remember the analogy of the flight. Our expectation is a little bit more than just to get there. Our expectation is to have a pretty decent experience along the way. Now, in the airline industry, we know that decent is probably perhaps the best we can hope for a lot of times. But think about this in relationships to restaurants you go out to, folks. People do that every day. You often won't go back to a restaurant where the food was phenomenal but the service was terrible. And sometimes we go to restaurants where the service is phenomenal and the food is so-so. One of my favorite restaurants, I will say the food is at best average, but the people there know my name when I walk in the door. You can't buy that. That's phenomenal stuff. So what do our students expect with that money that they are laying down every year? And I don't know that it's $20,000 at your institution, but fill in the blank. With writing that sizable of a check, what do they expect from us? And I don't mean I want to be handed a diploma. I mean, what are their expectations in all of their engagement with us? First and foremost, responsiveness. This came up over and over and over in these focus groups. As well as there to be a little bit more congruency between the effort we put into getting them to start with us and what we do with them after they've said, yes, they're willing to enroll with us. Students really pick up on how hard our front-end recruitment staff are working, but they feel it kind of drops off the minute they get to yes, the minute they enroll. Policies, procedures, paperwork, and processes that don't make sense. They expect those things to make sense when they're paying this kind of money. And while we can't make every one of them perfect, I hope what you are doing right now in the offices that you are sitting in listening to this webinar is writing down 2 or 3 policies that you know are absolute headaches for your students, and they probably don't make sense to you either. Write them down, get them on a Post-it, put them in the front of your desk, and look at them every day until you get something done about them. You don't have to fix everything, but fix a couple things. They would like for us to communicate with one another so that they don't have to do it for us. It's a fair statement. Again, I'm probably as guilty of it as anyone when I worked in higher ed. We have to do better at this. We have to be willing to take the time to sit down with one another more often internally. Our adult students want to be welcomed across campus. It was an interesting conversation with one focus group specifically where they talked about that sense of feeling like outsiders. And again, while they get that that campus doesn't exist mainly for them or only for them, they expect it to exist at least a little bit for them. And I'm going to push even a step further on that, something they don't say, but of course we all know. Considering the dollar and the revenue that our adult student and graduate students bring into our campuses, I don't think that's too much to ask. A lot of our campuses exist because of our adult and graduate student programs. They have a right to feel just as welcome there as the next person is. For $20,000 a year, they expect fewer hassles, fewer headaches, fewer hoops, fewer hurdles, and they expect to graduate. But they also know that that's on them. Let me keep going. I want the people here to understand, and again, drive home a point. I want a lovely young woman who is a mother of two, who is really trying to make this work. I want the people here to understand that I'm doing the best I can. When I come here for class, I'm thinking about my future. I'm making this investment in myself, but I'm not always confident about it. I don't ask for your help because I'm lazy. I ask for it because I don't know how this all works. I'm going to personally hang on to that quote and put it on my desk and try to remember it every day, because her words, I don't ask for your help because I'm lazy. I ask for your help because I don't know how this all works. Very powerful. And is that reminder, and when you approach the counter to help someone, or when someone steps into your office and you're thinking, oh my gosh, again, let your eyes drift down to that line, and I will promise you it will help you to do a better job in serving the student that's sitting in front of you, even if it's a difficult student. So what can we do and what do we need to do? And I'm going to get through this quickly. I wanted to show you a couple of things that a couple of schools have tried to put together to do a little bit better on customer service, and I am going to move quickly through these. One institution that I'm pretty familiar with offers a really nice technology-enhanced package of services to really try to target at-risk students or students that they perceive are going to struggle initially as they make the transition into school. It's heavily based on, like I said, technology supported. So there's a lot of communications that go out frequently. Midway through the first class, they get emails sent to a certain group of students, you know, how are things going, how are things doing. They offer a lot of services in relationship to their website. I'm going to show you those in a minute. They have specifically trained professionals at their institution to be coaches and trained them to take that mentality and that approach. And they've identified people on their campus who are the coaches for their students. This is a program that's fairly new, just getting underway, but obviously the goal here is to really impact retention. On their website, and I just like this phrase, it is our intention to instill in you the determination and drive to fulfill your educational goals. We are here to help you at any time you are not performing as you feel you should. If you feel undue academic pressure, or you want to sharpen your learning skills, including time management, learning styles, procrastination, managing stress, and much more. This is what's right on their website in relationship to their adult student services, and I love that. I think the essence and the heart of the message that's trying to be communicated there is huge. They have specific student services available right on the web in relationship to all of these things. Tutorials on pretty much everything you might ever need to do. All of their forms are right there in an easy spot. Learning tools that are helpful links, frequently asked questions, finding your advisor, contact us, all right within a neat package. So one super approach. Another really interesting approach that I love is an institution that's really created a one-stop shop and identified a student success coordinator that each student is advised to. So these student success coordinators serve 250 students and serve as the single point of contact for all things related to that student. And it really, I do mean all things, academic advising to collecting their bills, to really calling the student saying, hey, you know, you haven't paid your bill. This person is this is the relationship. This is the magic relationship here at this particular institution, and this has had significant impact. And again, I apologize for moving so quickly because this is a really interesting program. If you want to talk to me about it further, send me an email afterwards. I'm happy to. They really have done this to create a consistency of experience between being recruited and then being cared for as a student, and very, very intelligent move. That single point of contact has really allowed for that building of that relationship and really allowed for an internal advocate for students if issues do need to be addressed with other offices. It's been helpful to the university to have one human being who has great depth of knowledge on a single student, and that too has really helped. I want to show you two things that I think are fascinating, because when you think of that job, oh my gosh, it's like jack of all trades, master of none sort of position on campus. Interestingly, the employees that fill these roles are some of the longest standing employees within the adult student serving division of this institution. They have very little turnover. They do, however, bring to the table a unique set of skills. They are masters at both paperwork and people, and we know that those two skills together are difficult to come by. They're very empathetic, and they've earned the right to be really direct with those students. They have dotted line reporting to several offices on campus. They are frequently trained, 2 retreats every year and 6 webinar trainings per year, and they're empowered to do their jobs, but they are held very accountable for the jobs that they do. The results of this student success coordinator at this particular institution, they implemented this over the last 4 years, and they've been able to move their retention from 73% to 82%. If you do the math on that in dollars, on even 100 students, folks, we're talking about a lot of money, certainly enough money to pay for that position. So huge, love that opportunity. And this is one that someone actually just shared with me a couple weeks ago at a conference. We were actually doing a very similar session to this conversation, and he raised that at their institution, they really struggled with a lot of transfer credit related headaches because they happen to sit in a place where there are a lot of for-profit institutions that don't have any accreditation. And so they were frequently having to turn away credits from students. And so what this school actually put in place was a set of competency exams so that they didn't just have to communicate, we don't take credits from Brenda Harms University. What they were able to communicate is, well, I'm seeing your transcript from Brenda Harms University. I know you've got some credits from there. Here's our situation. That's an unaccredited institution, so what we ask that you do is take a competency exam to demonstrate that you got the information out of those courses, and we award you credits based on those competency exams. Great workaround of a difficult situation. Okay, so in our last 5 minutes together, what issues do we just have to address? We owe this to our students. First and foremost, it's not 1995 anymore, and I have to thank my good friend Tony who gave me this phrase. I love that. So many of our institutions and so many of our programs were developed at institutions 20 plus years ago, and we agreed to things, policies, procedures, rules, 20 plus years ago, number one, in order to reach a point of agreement with our institutions, but also number two, because maybe they made sense then. They may not make sense anymore. Today, we are extraordinarily important to the campuses that we serve. Our students bring in revenue that our institutions are very dependent on. It is time to go back to rules, policies, expectations that were put in place in 1995 and have hard conversations and talk about changing them again. You cannot leverage any longer the excuse of, well, that's the way it's always been, or they'll never let us change that. Now is the right time to ask. So we have to be willing to do that. We have to be willing to evaluate our own policies. I heard a lot of complaints about attendance policies in adult student serving programs, but also things like blocking students from registration of future classes if their bill wasn't paid. And the complaint came in when we knew that there was employer tuition reimbursement, and we were trying to figure out how the check was going to come from the employer to the school. So silly things like that. Guidelines for faculty regarding expectations. Application processes were often discussed as being policies that were really challenging. We have to be willing to take customer service beyond just recruitment, and I think I've talked about that enough that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. But let's keep in mind, folks, the ultimate goal is not getting them enrolled. The ultimate goal is getting them to graduate. And so we have to do better all the way across the board. We have to create a culture where this is important. One of my dear friends in the business uses this phrase all the time. You'll never get in trouble for helping a student. And getting in trouble might seem like a funny phrase, but I hear it a lot on college campuses. Oh, I'll get in trouble if I do that. What we have to create is a culture within our adult student serving program, as well as the other ancillary areas on campus that touch them, where as long as you're working to help a student and at what best interest of the student, we're a go. We're in good shape there. We have to create a culture where we're willing to do what's not just easy for us, but easy for them, and often that means harder for us. We have to continuously recruit our own students. We have to remind them why they picked us. Hugely important. And true service is what we're really all about here. It's our job to help people. If these students don't exist, we don't have work. You look at students differently when you take that mindset. I think customer service needs to be a high priority, and I would tell you personally in the hiring world of Brenda Harms, I'll take a person who has average skills, but a huge focus on customer service over a person who has phenomenal skills but no ability to interact with people any day of the week. People skills are huge and they are hard to teach. When you're hiring, look at this customer service mindset as being a key piece of hiring. We have to stop making excuses for the problem within your department. And we all know what I'm talking about. It's the one person that we hope our students don't interact with that we know has been an issue in our department for years, or it might be a department across the hall. We have to stop making excuses and dig in on those situations. We have to be willing to train people. Customer service is a constant conversation, but we have to provide training. We can't just assume people are going to understand what this means. We have to train. And then we have to evaluate customer service as part of our job description evaluations. In our closing minute here, I want to challenge you to identify 2 areas on your campus and within your institution that you know are difficult for your students in relationship to customer service. 2 areas. Just identify 2. It doesn't have to be the whole list, and I know there's probably a list of 20. Pick 2 things and go out and do something about those 2 things. It's small steps, folks. It's not just wave a magic wand and all of a sudden you've shifted the culture. It's small steps. I really want to encourage you to please fill out the evaluation form that I know we're going to provide to you at the end of this session. It's really helpful to me as a presenter in what you want to hear more about and about how we did and what I could have done better on. So please do that. I'm a big believer in doing better. That includes for me. If you'd like to continue this conversation, please shoot me an email or on that form, make a note of it. I would love to reach out to you more. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, so please don't hesitate to let me know if you'd like to talk further about customer service on your campus. I think it's just critical. We didn't have a lot of time for questions, but I am going to encourage you this. Put questions on your reporting form or send questions in right now to Becky, and I will get back with you and answer those questions. I'll assemble responses to questions and send them out to you because I had too much to say. Thank you all for spending time with me today on this very important topic, and go out and do better. I know that you can, and I know that you will. So thank you so much, and thank you on behalf of the students who let me share their opinions with you. Take care, everyone. Have a good afternoon.